Hey, what's going on there, folks? Welcome back here to another update on this Thursday, February 22nd, 2024. It's about 10:33 a.m. here, California time. Latest activity on the Earthquake 3D globe looks like a one-pointer. Did see a little bit of uptick last night. Nothing major going on since those two large flares kicked off last night, but there is some stuff stirring up there on the internet and social media lately, and I'm here to try and clear up the confusion here when it comes to solar flare activity and things going down. You know, power grid, navigation systems. Obviously, that can have an effect there, negative from solar flare activity. But this activity that's really stirring up this morning across social media with regards to a massive outage here in the cell phone network, various issues going on there across the area. From anywhere from AT&T, Cricket, Verizon, T-Mobile, lots of stuff going on in terms of not functioning like it should, right? Now, all of this is not related to a solar flare or the two solar flares that we've seen last night. I'm getting some reports as well now on social media that there's some pharmaceutical companies being attacked from some type of cyber attack going on. So it just happens. Maybe they did it. Maybe they decided to pull the strings there following these flares just to put people in a panic, right? Because solar flare activity, they've been pushing that issue here recently that power grids can go down, and the solar cycle 25 maximum is coming up here, and a lot of fear-mongering going on out there in social media and also the mainstream news media. So I'm kind of here to just put an end to some of that. Obviously, we did have a couple large flares last night, 2 X flares to be exact. None of these were impulsive in terms... these were impulsive, but none were eruptive in terms of, ejecting a material there out into space. Now, the difference here in terms of a flare, like you're seeing up here, X flare right there, and we've seen an M flare as well on this side. The difference between these flares and the subsequent ejective material that they could produce, a CME, is, one is, pretty neat looking and travels about at the speed of light here to reach Earth here in about 7 minutes. That doesn't really have a major effect compared to the ejective material that a potential flare could produce, a CME. That is basically a huge amount of material that's being shot out, blasted off from the surface of the sun, producing billions of tons of material at very high speeds there. Not the speed of light, but it does reach us here in about a couple days if it's a really fast CME. And that material can cause more effects than solar flares, and it can produce some radio blackouts. It produces power grid issues. The worst possible thing that can happen from some large flare activity without a CME activity is degradation and these blackouts in navigation and communication systems. Now, that does not include cellular communication systems. These operate on a whole different wavelength compared to the navigation and the high-frequency radio communication systems that operate between about 3 and 30 MHz. So we're talking about ham radio and stuff like that. But so these little flares that popped off, they're not little, they're actually decent, right? X flares, they did not produce any CME activity. These were just very impulsive, sharp events. Let me show you guys here real quick. Really sharp events last night, an X 1.9 and then an X 1.7 here. Very sharp, very impulsive. Now, if this had been an ejective CME associated with this X flare, we would see this drawn out much thicker than this one right here. There may have been a little CME associated with that, but we would not feel that CME here for a couple days. But I don't think it's directed at Earth. So these flares here, folks, definitely can have an effect here on this planet, but not associated with pharmaceutical companies going down, other issues going on, with cellular networks. That is all some type of cyber hack that it's possible they thought, well, there's some flares going on. This pull the strings here and cause a little bit of panic here in the world, or at least here in the States. I don't know if this was a worldwide outage there in terms of cellular network, but I don't think so. So here is the effects here in terms of radiation storms that are produced by these flares, right? Now, I think we've seen an S3 here last night during the X flares. Those create radio blackouts on the sunlit side of the Earth. And last night, there was no sun up in the sky. So, obviously, the strong radiation storm was produced over on the opposite side of the country, opposite side of the world from the U.S. Now, strong S3 system, basically, there can be effects there in the satellite operations, and HF radio propagation through the polar regions and navigation positions errors likely, but not associated with cellular networks. Even if you get into the S5 category here, that's decent. We don't see those too often, fewer than one per cycle. So, one cycle equals 11 years. We're in solar maximum cycle 25 right now. And even at that, high-frequency communication systems possible through the polar regions and position errors make navigation operations extremely difficult. So we're not looking at cellular networks going down. The power grids would go down due to the overloading of the system from a CME. But we don't have any CME headed this way. This is all, events from last night in terms of the flaring activity. It's not associated at all with the cellular networks going down. And again, it's not only cellular. It looks like there's some other internet issues going on, and the pharmaceutical companies. Somebody is behind it. Whoever it is, I'm not going to comment further on it, but I'm just here to kind of point out that this activity is not associated with the flaring activity. We've seen a larger X flare earlier this year. And that was centered over, I believe, the Pacific Ocean in terms of the daylight area of the Earth and the position that the Earth was facing the sun. So that did nothing. We didn't see any cell phone outages. We've seen many X flares throughout the solar cycle, and bigger ones than what we've seen last night. So definitely someone behind this cyber attack. Now this here is a KP index here. This is in relation to the arrival of the CME, the billions of tons of ejected material produced from the explosion on the sun, the flaring activity. Now, they can, we've seen this up here around 7 here recently, a G3 class storm. I think it was this year, maybe last year. And those, we can see auroras down into Oregon, sometimes Northern California, in some of the mid-latitude states here. These stronger events right here can definitely create some issues in the power grid systems and whatnot. So in relation to the two there, the solar flare activity and the CME is associated with the coronal mass ejection. Got to remember that. That's all the billions of tons of energy that's being shot out, not at light speed, but it does take a couple days to reach Earth. The flaring activity, the effects of it, at least on the ionosphere, arrive here at near light speed, literally within minutes from the sun to Earth. And that just creates radio blackout over the sunlit side of the Earth and the polar regions. Right now, we do have, it looks like a little flaring going on here. This is just a little example. Looks like that the culprit here of the recent X-flare activity is still flaring. Not with anything in the X-flare category. It looks like some C-flare. But as you can see, the sun is basically centered right over this area here. This is the sunlit side of the Earth. Obviously, nighttime over here across this area. This was opposite here during last night, obviously, with the flaring going on. So this is the effects. This isn't a strong radiation storm. but we are seeing some C flare activity. And when you get up there in the radiation strong storms, you see navigation issues, but not anything related in terms of power grids, cell phone networks. Remember, flaring, minimal effect; CMEs, major effect. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here at what's going on with the sun today. It is coming off of all this activity, at least in the flaring department, is coming off of 3590, and we talked about this yesterday, how it's growing in complexity. It is still looking fairly promising here, producing some further flaring. So far, it has produced 2 X flares, the X 1.9 and the X 1.7, and it's currently flaring with some C flare activity. So things are still looking possible that we could see some more stronger flares. 99% chance for a C flare, M flare at 55, X flare around 20% chance or so, and a proton event 10% chance. So keep our eyes open for that. Still seeing some flaring, but again, this is not associated with any cellular networks going down. I've seen some folks there on Twitter or X with decent names, the kind of high profile names there, stating that we just had a numerous X flares last night. This has to be related. I doubt it. It doesn't make sense as to why it would be related. We've seen stronger flares before, and nothing's changed. This is just a rug pull from somebody out there that wanted to create a little havoc here on a Thursday by pulling the strings there of cellular networks and other stuff right now. Yeah, who knows? Got to watch for maybe some further outages. Could be the banks next. You never know. Bank systems could go down. All right, so yeah, continue to watch 3590. We do have a couple coronal holes here. These are solar wind streams that would flow from, they're not actually holes in the sun, but areas where high-speed solar wind is flowing from. Kind of look like holes, but they're not. And I don't think that's going to have an effect on the space weather activity here on Earth. They're too minimal. But 3590, keep an eye on that as we head in the days ahead here. Not a whole lot of auroras happening right now. Again, the auroras are not going to pop off from an X flare. They are going to pop off from the ejective material that X flare could produce, the CME. I'll try to cover this more a little bit later. Well, with all this X flaring activity, one would expect elevated earthquake activity, right? In that theory, well, not seeing it. This is one of those times here where, we've had a couple different X flares here in the last 24 hours, and we have not seen any large earthquakes take place. That decent larger X flare that popped off on the 1st of this year, a couple hours later, we had that 7-pointer out here across Japan. And we've seen similar events where elevated space weather activity leads to earthquake activity on the larger scale, but this is one of those times we're not seeing it. So that's a negative mark here in my book in terms of the relationship between space weather and earthquake activity. I'm leaning more towards the CME activity, right? The impacts from CME, because that's a lot of material pushed on the magnetic our magnetic field around the Earth, right? Think about all that material and how it has an effect on the magnetic field, the ionosphere, pressure in the atmosphere. I think that does produce some pressure differences here across the planet, and that's what I'm waiting for, a CME. If we get a decent CME, we'll see how that affects the earthquake activity. But from the X flare standpoint right now, I haven't really seen any uptick in terms of earthquake activity. One of those times where we haven't. So we'll continue to keep records here and mark them down in the book and see if we can't figure this thing out. Earthquake activity. Let's go ahead and take a look here at the 2.5 map and above. One might assume this is a lot of earthquake activity in California. 130 earthquakes in the last 24 hours? Well, no, that's actually fairly common. We see microquake activity up here every single day in the 100 and couple hundred range. But far as 2.5 and above, only got 3 earthquakes out here. A couple of those from yesterday. So 3.2 here on the, looks like it's in between the Hayward Fault and the Calaveras Fault system right here. Maybe off on the, well, there's a couple different segments here. Either way, 3.2 coming in earlier this morning near the Fremont, California area. And aside from that, mostly smaller microquake activity. One earthquake up in Washington from this morning, a 3.4. But overall, earthquake activity generally quiet for the most part across the states there. And Hawaii, still seeing some movement out here across the area, the Pahala region. No major changes going on, although a little bit of activity stirring up out here in the Loihi Seamount region. We'll continue to watch that. Of course, we have seen a whole lot of magma being displaced here from the summit region off to the southwest rift zone and kind of following a trail offshore here recently. If we go back the last 30 days, we can kind of see that. Well, it's a little cluttered here, but you have to follow this region right here, and you can kind of see that. We've lost all the tilt there at the summit, so that magma has been displaced across this area, and you know, it's kind of leaning out towards Loihi Seamount, so we'll have to see what happens with that as we head into the days and months ahead. Earthquake activity across the western Pacific plate here. Well, let's see what we got. A little bit of this from last night. One earthquake, though, 4.4, Papua New Guinea. So really, you know, no major uptick following all this X-flare activity. Minimal activity here across the region. A couple fours being produced here. Looks like mostly around the Mediterranean there. The earthquake 3D globe does show some of the activity and some smaller quakes, but not a whole lot going on there in terms of larger movement. The Atlantic Ocean, quiet and clear. Not a whole lot of earthquake activity here across those divergent zones. And yeah, so we'll just kind of continue to watch this and see how, well, Alaska's looking a little bit active up here in terms of the multitude of these microquakes here in the last hour. But again, that's common up there as well, right? It's a major subduction zone, a lot of fault systems under strain up there. 2.5 map and above shows a handful of earthquakes out here, but really not seeing any major swarm, just a little microquake activity elevated in the last hour or so. Yellowstone National Park, supervolcano. Not a whole lot going on here across the area, I don't think. Is this one working? Yes, it is. Fairly quiet, as you can see. Not a whole lot of movement out here. We would obviously see. Storm Prediction Center, as far as the weather goes, might have some severe weather as we head into day 6 and day 7 here. On this map, you can kind of see the Storm Prediction Center hinting at a decent chance of some severe weather possibilities there across the area. We'll get into that as we get closer to that time frame. The numerical models out here, I'm sure we'll see some of that. Basically, what's going on here, got a lot of colder air coming down here from the north. A little jet stream pattern flip here, bringing a lot of colder air interacting with some of the warmer, moist air. That will create some severe weather potential. Again, we'll cover that, though, as we get closer to that date. Our next system out here in California looks to be a collision here of colder air and some subtropical moisture coming into California early next week. Not expecting much, but definitely some colder air coming in. And after that, these patterns have been staying fairly consistent here with a return of heavy rain there across the west coast into the first week of March. So we'll continue to watch that. We got a couple days to dry out, though. That's good. We'll definitely we'll take it because, man, we've had a lot of rain out here in Northern California, and in fact the West Coast in general. All right, folks, so you know, be on guard. Beta Gamma Delta class here, 3590 has advanced from being a beta class within the last couple days to a Beta Gamma Delta class. That's the most complex structure there. A lot of intermixing there, and growth within the magnetic structure that this sunspot holds. So watch out for some further X flares. Again, folks, if you could share this video on the social media platforms, the relationship between the two are not there. It doesn't take place that way. We don't see, you know, flaring activity affect these cellular networks. It just doesn't happen. We've had, again, we've had numerous X flares and no effect at all on here in the past. Nothing's changed. These guys haven't weakened their system. It's just, it sounds like a cyber attack than anything. And, just definitely got to be on guard. Keep an eye on banks and stuff like that. That could be possibly up next if they're hitting cellular networks, pharmaceutical companies. To people can't get their subscriptions. Someone's behind it, and whether it's a country or a person, who knows? But either way, the solar flaring not associated with today's cyber hacks. The sun did not go out and hack these sites. Humans did. We'll catch you guys back out here a little bit later on this evening, folks. Have a good day. Stay safe out there. It looks like a lot of these reports are going away, though. So it looks like maybe things are starting to come back to normal. Networks coming back up and whatnot after maybe resetting them. All right. We'll catch you guys back here later.